Chapter 4. Tavern Games. The tavern door burst open, and a dozen men stormed in. Dressed like the typical band of sellswords, they headed straight towards the three largest tables before planting themselves down and bellowing for ale. With the tavern being sparsely occupied, it wasn't long before the drinks were being served. And as the tavern maids started bustling around the tables, a mercenary leaned over to speak to one of his companions.
"So, boss, when are we delivering the—"
A stern glare from the man being addressed silenced the talker, who suddenly dropped his gaze to stare timidly at his feet. The man whom had been called boss looked around himself, and when satisfied that no one was eavesdropping, pulled his talkative companion in close and whispered,
"I will be delivering the commodity tomorrow. You lot will wait here until I return with our payment."
For a moment, it looked like the man who had spoken first was about to argue, but the boss's continued glare made him reconsider, and he settled for grumbling quietly under his breath. However, the leader's attention was no longer on the man, but had instead been redirected at the tavern wench sauntering towards their table. By the heavens, she was gorgeous. Although wearing the shapeless, dull dress typical of her occupation, and with a plain white handkerchief wrapped around her head that obstructed the view of her hair, there was no mistaking the youthful beauty of the woman who looked to be in her late teens or early 20s. Stopping in front of the men, she gave them a smile that was at the same time sweetly innocent, yet mischievously seductive. Playfully she leaned over the table, her beautiful eyes locked onto the mercenary leader's gaze, while her fingers traced along the table's surface. Desire rose within the man, and he reached out to grab her. Or more accurately, he wanted to reach for her, but his arm refused to move. For a moment, the man thought he had been overwhelmed by his desire, and chuckled to himself before trying again. To his horror, his arm still refused to move. In fact, his entire body would not move, except for his eyes, which continued to stare at the beautiful tavern maid. Drifting downwards from her face, his gaze settled on her fingers that had been playing on the table's surface. Only then did he notice that she had not been doodling, but had in fact been drawing an intricate pattern that was now glowing with arcane light. Shiman, family name Li, Grand Marshal of the Zhong Empire, sat at the desk of his office reading reports, while one of his aides stood to attention nearby. There was a knock on the door, and upon receiving permission to enter, a single person walked in. No longer wearing the maid's dress, the young woman instead wore the service uniform of a junior officer and held a rolled-up parchment in her hands. Standing to attention on the opposite side of the desk, she saluted sharply, and then stood silently awaiting orders.
"Report,"
said Shiman, and the woman held out the scroll.
"Mission accomplished, sir."
Taking the scroll, Shiman unrolled it onto his desk to reveal a map of the Empire's northern borders, with detailed descriptions of troop dispositions, fortress locations, and supply depots. Satisfied of the map's authenticity, he rolled it back up and summoned for the waiting aide.
"Have this delivered to Eagle Pass, and tell General Wong that if this happens again, then he is on his own."
With a sharp salute, the aide took the scroll and left the room. Now alone with the woman, Shiman spoke.
"At ease, and sit down,"
he said casually, as he inclined his head towards the chair sitting opposite him. Pulling up the seat, the woman sat down, her posture visibly relaxing.
"Well done, Fei Yin. You completed the mission quickly and cleanly.
Thanks, Papa.
replied Fei Yin, with a tiny smile that hinted at the pride from receiving rare praise from her father.
So how are your preparations for the tournament going?
All done. I'll be ready to set off first thing in the morning.
Said Fei Yin, her voice filled with anticipation at participating in the upcoming tournament. Opening a drawer at his desk, Shiman reached inside and pulled out a small wooden box.
Then I better give you this now, as it looks like we will be celebrating your birthday on the road.
Surprise flashed across Fei Yin's face. Between recovering the stolen map and preparing for the tournament, she had completely forgotten about her upcoming 17th birthday. Reaching down, she picked up the box and opened it. Inside was a thumb ring made out of flawless white jade and carved to depict the image of a warhorse trampling on a wolf. It was the fabled ring of Huo Kubing, the legendary warrior who in the early years of the empire had subdued the northern tribes, ushering in the Wu Man era, a period widely regarded as the empire's first golden age.
Papa, I can't.
You can, and you will.
Said Shiman in a voice that made the words a command. Realizing that refusal was not an option, Fei Yin picked up the ring and with trembling hands put it on her right thumb.
Thank you, Papa.
Reaching out, Shiman touched his daughter lightly on the cheek.
Now go and say goodbye to your friends. And remember to not stay out too late. We've got an early start in the morning.
With a beaming smile, Fei Yin got up and kissed her father on the cheek, before turning around to obey his words. Now alone, Shiman reached back into the drawer and pulled out a small silver brooch. Shaped in the form of a she-wolf curling around its cub, its craftsmanship was rather crude, but nevertheless contained a sense of savage beauty. Smiling sadly, Shiman stroked its metallic surface and started whispering,
Our little girl is growing up, and you would be so proud of her.
Then, with a final sigh, he returned the brooch back to its resting place before resuming his work.